Hi, so I'm Chris from the band Turbowolf. I'm joined with Blake and Andy from the band as well. We're here in the historic and epic looking Roman baths of Bath, and we're here to talk about our mutual interest in all things unexplained and ancient. And luckily enough, we're joined with one of the most prolific and knowledgeable writers in this subject, the author of books such as The Sign and the Seal and Fingerprints of the Gods, Mr. Graham Hancock.
Hi. Good to be with you. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you here.
Yeah.
So, just like to start off by maybe if you could tell us about how you got onto this path of researching ancient civilizations and ancient history.
Yeah. Well, like just about everything that's happened in my life, it was an accident, really, a set of circumstances. I used to be a journalist. I was the East Africa correspondent for The Economist, and I was based in Nairobi in Kenya. And on my beat was Ethiopia, which I used to visit regularly. This was during the early 80s, and it was a time of war and a time of famine. And during these cataclysmic events, I found myself in an ancient city in northern Ethiopia called Aksum, in the grounds of a cathedral, a very ancient Christian cathedral called St. Mary of Zion, in which there's a little chapel. And in front of that chapel, I met a monk who wouldn't let me go inside. And when I put it through the translator, why couldn't I go inside, he explained that they had the Ark of the Covenant in there, as in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. And I thought, what? You know, can you be serious? And he said, yes, I am serious, actually. We do have the Ark of the Covenant here, and nobody's allowed to see it, not even the emperor. Well, I thought he was pulling my leg, but I started to investigate it, and I found that actually it's the whole basis of Ethiopian culture, that they claim to have this object. I also found that academics dismissed the notion and thought that it was just a fantasy that they'd made up. But there was something about the arrogance and rigidity of the academics that really annoyed me. And I thought, let's just see if we can stand this story up. Let's see what the Ethiopians are on about. And I began to investigate it over the years. And as I did so, I began to realize that they did have a case, and that they really could have that amazing lost object, the most, the most mysterious object of the Bible, could be sitting in this chapel in the highlands of Ethiopia. And that's what led me down the track of investigating ancient mysteries. That was the first book I wrote about an ancient mystery. It was called The Sign and the Seal. It was eventually published in 1992. One of the notions that came out on that was that the Ark of the Covenant, which, I mean, the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark actually plays it right. It really did, according to the Bible, strike people dead with bolts of fire, would rise up into the air and rush towards the enemies of Israel. When the Philistines opened it, they were struck down with cancerous tumors. You know, it sounds like a piece of technology. It sounds like radiation or something like that. So I began to wonder, could there have been lost technologies in ancient times? And the research for that book, one of the places it took me to was Egypt. I found myself in front of the Great Pyramid. I found the same arrogant, narrow-minded academics saying, no, this is just a simple piece of primitive technology, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that they thought such a thing. 6 million tons, 480 feet high, 13-acre footprint, perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. It appears out of nowhere at the beginning of Egyptian history, and they said they've got this whole problem solved. So again, I wanted to give the opposite point of view, give the alternative point of view, and that's what led me into looking for a lost civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that leads us onto our next question, which we wanted to talk about why mainstream ancient historians want to keep this certain viewpoint out there, rather than trying to accept a different viewpoint.
Yeah. I think that first of all, I want to pay tribute to mainstream historians and archaeologists at one level, which is that these are, I believe, fundamentally honest, thorough, hard-working people who get their hands dirty in the sand, in the earth, digging up artifacts from the past. I think when they say there's no mystery in the past, they themselves genuinely believe that. I don't think that they're trying to pull off a con trick on the public. But I do think that that they are locked into a particular mindset, and that mindset is the evolutionary mindset that sees our society as the apex and the pinnacle of the human story, a sort of evolutionary process, you know, from primitive cavemen through a gradual development into agriculture, and then down into Roman times and the Greeks and the Middle Ages, and finally, you know, the Enlightenment and the beginning of science and the coming of our majestic high-tech civilization. So it's supposed to be a story of slow evolution. And if you're locked into that idea of how history works, it's very difficult to accept that there could have been something perhaps even higher than us, which was able to do things that we cannot do in the remote past. It's an idea that they find very, very hard to accept. So this is the filter. This is the filter through which they view reality. And the effect of a filter is to cut out everything that doesn't fit through the holes. So that's what they do. They just dismiss the anomalous evidence or find plausible explanations for it, which can be dismissed. And also, because academia is a job, it is a structure. If you want to get a job in that business, you need to buy into its mindset. If you don't buy into its mindset, you actually won't get hired. You won't get moved along. So that, again, there's a filtration process where those who might have wilder or different or extraordinary ideas are just weeded out, and you end up with the ones who have bought in totally to the existing mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to mention there, like maybe for people that might not know much about this subject, maybe if you could talk about some of the evidence that sort of supports the case that there may be more to the story than mainstream historians.
Yes.
And obviously, there's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about. One of the mysteries that really intrigues me is that we have certain maps which have come down to us from the past. Now, very often what these maps are maps that were made in the 14th or 15th or 16th century, but they were copied from older maps, and the map makers themselves tell us this. The famous Piri Reis map, which was actually drawn by a known Turkish admiral in 1513, and which shows Antarctica 300 years before we discovered it, that map, Piri Reis states on it in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older maps that he had access to, but which are now lost. And he suggested that those maps had come down to him from the Library of Alexandria, that they had been removed from that library before it was burnt in ancient times. So the suggestion is that he had access to an archive of maps now lost, which were the main features of which were incorporated in the map that he created, and other maps. The famous mapmaker Mercator was another who copied from ancient maps, and Orontius Phineas as well. And what these maps all have in common is, first of all, fantastically accurate latitudes and longitudes. Now, longitude, I won't go into the technical details, but longitude is something that's very difficult to do. And until our culture cracked the problem of longitude by inventing chronometers, watches, clocks that could keep accurate time at sea, our ships were constantly bashing into coastlines that they didn't expect were going to be there because they were too far east or west of where they thought they were.
Yeah.
So it's really the late 1700s that we get the science to begin to make accurate longitudes on maps. And yet in these much older maps, which in turn are based on even older lost maps, we find spot-on accurate longitudes. This is a huge problem. Secondly, we find Antarctica on lots of these maps, and it's just a fact of our history that Western civilization did not discover Antarctica until 1818. So what's it doing accurately drawn on a map from 1500 copied from an even older lost map?
Is it not also Antarctica underneath the ice? Is that
And it's
right?
underneath the ice. And again, some of the maps actually show the subglacial topography of Antarctica, as though those maps were originally made when Antarctica was not ice covered. This is a huge problem for history. It's a very difficult problem to explain, and I've never seen mainstream academics satisfactorily deal with this problem. And what I found, having done a great deal of research into this, and in fact worked with some mainstream academics, there's a chap called Glenn Milne at the University of Durham in the north of England, whose team are the leading specialists in the issue of sea level rise. They have a computer program that will show you any coastline around the world as it looked at any time in the last 30,000 years, because at the end of the last ice age, between 20,000 and 12,000 years ago, sea level actually rose by 400 feet. And enormous areas of land were swallowed by the sea. So the world of 20,000 years ago looked totally different from the world of today. And the alarming thing is, on some of these ancient maps, is that they spot on accurately conform with how we know the coastlines looked 20 or 15,000 years ago.
Right. Wow.
So again, the suggestion is that, to create those maps, first of all, the technology to have accurate longitudes, and secondly, the infrastructure to explore the world. That they had ships that could explore the entire globe, and even very difficult to reach places like Antarctica, and that this may have been as much as 15,000 or more years ago. This is extremely disturbing to the mainstream view of history.
Because their view at that period
is that our ancestors at that time that's what's called the Upper Paleolithic, that they were simple Stone Age cavemen who only had stone tools, who were hunter-gatherers, who lived a very simple nomadic life with no question of ships, no question of technology of any kind. So these maps are a huge anomaly. The Great Pyramid of Egypt, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, and indeed the whole majestic complex on the Giza Plateau is in itself another piece of in-your-face evidence that is just being ignored at the moment. And again, we have one or two mainstream academics who've come out of the cupboard and said they actually do have problems with the official dating. And one of those is Professor Robert Schoch at the University of Boston, who has looked at the erosion patterns on the body of the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx is supposed to be 4,500 years old, 2,500 BC, if you accept the mainstream chronology. Yeah. But Schoch's work on the erosion patterns suggests that it was exposed at some point in its history to thousands of years of extremely heavy rainfall.
Right.
And the study of paleoclimatology is pretty good these days, and we know that the climate in Giza has been the same as it is now for at least 5,000 years. Right. And that means that the Sphinx has to be a lot older than that. And in fact, you need to go back 9,000 or 10,000 years to what's called the Neolithic subpluvial to get the kind of heavy rains at Giza which could have caused that erosion on the Sphinx. And that only tells us that the Sphinx was already there 9,000 or 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Doesn't really say how long it was there before that.
Yeah.
So the Sphinx is a problem. The megalithic temples that stand in front of the Sphinx that were actually created from the blocks that were removed from around the body of the Sphinx to create the body, therefore are of the same age. You have blocks of stone weighing 100 tons each in those temples. And then you come to the Great Pyramid itself, which is an astonishing piece of incredibly precise engineering. And this is the problem, because there are really no antecedents for it. Egyptologists are able to cite a few earlier monuments in Egypt which they suggest are part of the evolution, but really if you look at that with common sense and an open mind, it seems to me that they're talking nonsense. This thing is unbelievably precise. It's not just that it's huge, I mentioned the figures earlier, but it's 481 feet high. I'll repeat them. It has a footprint of 13 acres. It consists of 6 million blocks of stone, and it is aligned to true north within just 3/60ths of a single degree.
Yeah.
I mean, that is almost atomic clock precision on a monument of that scale.
Yeah.
And to get that level of precision on a monument of that scale involves astonishingly advanced architectural techniques.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit at all with the minimal evidence of evolution that Egyptologists are able to bring to the table. So again, I can't help feeling something's missing from the story.
Do you have any theories or any, have you encountered any evidence as to what the pyramids might have been for? Because the mainstream view is that there were tombs for their emperors, but I believe that they've never found any actual...
There's never been the body of a pharaoh found
Sure.
in any of the pyramids of Egypt.
So the question is, what...
And even
what
when
were
they did find one intact chamber, when the chamber was opened and the sarcophagus inside it was open, it was found to be empty.
Right.
what's going on, you know? The idea that these are tombs, I'm afraid that's a projection of modern ideas about the past onto the past. It isn't the past actually speaking to us. Well, I have to get a little mysterious here. Ancient Egyptians themselves saw themselves as the inheritors of a much more ancient system of knowledge, which they believed had been handed down to them by the gods. And there are texts, the Edfu building texts, so called because they're inscribed on the temple of Edfu. And those inscriptions say that they were set on that temple to preserve them, copied from a much earlier book, which is lost. Those speak of an island on which the gods lived, and they tell us that that island was flooded, and that many of the gods died, but that there were survivors, and that those surviving gods came and settled in Egypt and made it their land in a remote period that the ancient Egyptians call Zet Tepi, which is the first time. It's a rather emotive idea, really, that there was this first time when everything began in Egypt, and it was begun by gods who came to Egypt from a flooded homeland. So similar in a way to the story of Atlantis that is passed down to us by Plato. And by the way, Plato is the earliest surviving specific mention of Atlantis, but he tells us that he got the information from an earlier Greek Solon, who in turn got it from the ancient Egyptians. So these things begin to come together. Now, what's fascinating about the ancient Egyptians with this, what they believe to be a very old system of spiritual ideas that was passed down to them by the gods, is that their whole focus is on how we lead our lives right in order to secure our immortal destiny. Many scientists today will tell you that there's no such thing as life after death. They say we're just meat, our consciousness is simply an accident of this meat, and that when we die we rot and we're gone and there's nothing left. But actually that's not a fact. That is a scientific religion. That is a belief system. No scientist has actually died, seen nothing, and come back and reported it. There are no experiments, no evidence. It's just an opinion of science. And I think when we want to deal with such matters as the soul and the possible survival of death by consciousness, we need to listen to the masters in this field. And the masters in this field were undoubtedly the ancient Egyptians, who devoted their best minds for thousands of years to thinking about nothing else than this. And they believed that there was a certain way to live life, that to be born in a human body was a precious gift, that we had an obligation to use that gift in every possible way, to learn everything we could, to live full lives, to live generous and decent and good lives. And part of this system, I believe, were the pyramids, and the Great Pyramid of Egypt specifically. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death we make a perilous journey through a realm that they called the Duat, the netherworld, if you like. And in that journey we're confronted by tests where every moment of our lives will be weighed up and assessed. And they depict it as a place of narrow corridors and passageways and huge chambers, sometimes guarded by monsters, into which the soul enters. And when you look at those depictions, you find that the Great Pyramid is a three-dimensional model of this afterlife realm. Could it have been a place of preparation for the afterlife journey, which our scientists in their ignorance dismiss? But hey, what do they know? Let's listen to the people who really knew about this, and they regarded it as supremely important to be prepared for that journey, because they said when we die it doesn't all stop. We do go on, and we will be tested. We will be tested, and we'd better be ready for that test. So one thing I believe that the Great Pyramid was part of a science of immortality, if you like. I think it's more than that. It's also, oddly, a scale model of the northern hemisphere of the Earth. Of course, we're used to the Earth as a sphere, which indeed it is, and the Great Pyramid is, not a sphere, it's a pyramid. But here's the mysterious thing. If you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, in other words, if you go right round the base of it and measure it, and multiply the result you get by a very specific number, which is 43,200, you get exactly the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by exactly the same number, 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. So the dimensions of the Earth were encoded in this fabulously ancient and mysterious monument. We don't know when, and we don't know by who, you know? This is again a suggestion of Earth measuring, of understanding the Earth that's going on here. And by the way, that number, and this touches on, you asked about evidence from the past, pieces of technology. This number, 43,200, belongs to a series of numbers. It's not just random. A series of numbers that are found in ancient myths all around the world, and we don't know where those myths come from. But they all speak about a falling of the skies, a great change that takes place in the heavens when things begin again anew. And it's coming to be understood that what these myths are about is an astronomical phenomenon very hard to observe called the precession of the equinoxes, which changes the sign of the zodiac against the background of which the sun rises very, very slowly down the ages. Everybody's heard the song, "We live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius." It's actually related to that process because the sun has been rising on the spring equinox in Pisces, the fish, for the last 2,000 years, but it's in the process of moving into the next sign, Aquarius, and this is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth. It's our viewing platform from which we observe the stars. Naturally, since the platform is changing its orientation, our relationship to the stars changes very, very slowly. And it changes at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 43,200 is a multiple of 72. And interestingly enough, the Mayan calendar, which predicts some kind of grand ending taking place on the 21st of December 2012, and an ending of something, let's remember, should always be understood as the beginning of something else. That calendar is also full of this same system of numbers, that some ancient culture, what one academic, Giorgio de Santillana, who was a professor of the history of science at MIT, called an almost unbelievable ancestor culture, had observed this process and had accurately encoded it in myths to pass the information down to the future. This is something we need to watch out for. This is something we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I guess, have you got a question?
Well, I just wanted to mention, when you were talking then about the way the Egyptians regarded their gods as having come to them and passed on information. I mean, is there a feeling that these gods that a lot of the cultures talk about, rather than being, sort of mythical beings, could have actually just been some people of a more advanced technological stage that just came to them and handed on some secrets?
That's my view. I don't insist that my take on the past is correct. What I've tried to do, what my role has been, I think, is to provide an alternative to a massive mainstream view of the past. Everybody says it was like this. Let's consider if it might have been different. That's been the role that I've played. And the conclusion that I've come to is that mainstream academia may have missed something huge. They may have missed an enormous forgotten episode in human history, a lost civilization. And that all of the traditions, such as the story of Atlantis passed down to us by Plato, which is one of just thousands of similar traditions from all around the world, may actually be based on something true, something real. And what those suggest was that there was a former golden age, a high civilization that explored the world, that had amazing technology, that could do things with stone that we can't even dream of doing today, that understood time, that measured the earth, and that this civilization was destroyed in an enormous cataclysm, a global cataclysm, a great flood. Usually it's a flood, often accompanied by earthquakes and volcanic activity in these stories, but that there were some survivors. And those survivors settled in certain nodal points around the world, one of which was Giza in Egypt, but I believe Peru, the Andes, were also another place where survivors of this lost civilization settled, perhaps also Mexico, and encountering the primitive peoples who lived there, they then began to spread their knowledge to them. And so the suggestion is that these are who the gods were.
Yeah.
They were the survivors of a lost civilization. That's just my theory.
Yeah.
I've tried to present evidence to show that it might be the case, because there's a whole lot that the mainstream academics are missing.
Is there not some accounts of some of the people of South America actually describing when they were first sort of met, when they were asked if they built the structures, they said, "Oh no, we didn't build them."
Yeah.
Is this right, like that?
This is the case. This is the case very, very much so. When the Spanish first came to Peru, the Incas didn't really claim to have built all of the stuff that later historians have given to the Incas.
Yeah.
You know, there's the astonishing walls at Sacsayhuaman above Cusco. Which just is like a huge jigsaw puzzle of gigantic blocks of stone, 50, 60 tons. You stand above them, underneath them, they just tower above you. They're absolutely enormous. They're fitted together incredibly precisely. And then up on top of them are some other structures of much smaller bits of stone. Those smaller structures are the ones I believe the Incas built.
Yeah.
The much larger structures the Incas inherited from an earlier civilization that knew how to do stuff that the Incas
Yeah.
didn't know how to do. Yeah, there are endless accounts like that. And I think the story in Giza is very similar, that there are very ancient structures on the Giza plateau and more recent structures that were built in historical times. And the mistake of academia has been to hand the whole lot to, to the more recent civilization and to forget about the older origins, which, the Egyptians themselves always were very clear about. They said their civilization was a legacy, not a development.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Now, I was going to mention there about the cargo cults, which I guess a lot of people might not be aware of. Well, I suppose you could probably describe this better than I can.
Well, yes. I mean, the notion that there have been—it's not a notion; it's within living memory. When our high-tech culture has made contact with uncontacted peoples on islands or in jungles, that actually there has been a tendency for our culture to be worshipped as gods initially. And maybe it's the same process which has been witnessed anthropologically. We know it takes place. It's called a cargo cult because cargo was seen to be delivered from heaven on airplanes. Maybe that same kind of process was at work in much more ancient times, when the survivors of a lost civilization settled all around the globe and began to pass down their knowledge to the future. Interestingly, in that passage down of knowledge to the future is the notion that life on Earth may not be all that safe, that there are dangers that we should be aware of, and that these dangers are both physical and spiritual. This is what comes across again and again in the ancient myths, that we need to mind our behavior very carefully to make sure we do not fall out of harmony with the universe, because if we fall out of harmony with the universe, then the universe will strike us down. This is so in the story of Atlantis. They were seen to have become proud and arrogant and cruel, and they were struck down with a flood. It's indeed the story of the flood of Noah in the Bible, that the flood was sent by an angry God because humanity had become so vicious and evil and arrogant. And I just think, without wishing to put too fine a point on it, that if we look at many of the aspects of modern civilization today, we see the same viciousness, the same cruelty, the same arrogance taking place. And that suggests to me that unless we watch our step, our civilization could actually become the next lost civilization. And we may find in 10 or 20,000 years' time that we ourselves are the subjects of myth.
Onto the subject of 2012. It's a subject that a lot of people are interested in. There's a lot of theories about it being the end of the world. I just wondered what your take on it was, whether you think it's a time for transformation spiritually, or actually maybe the end of the world.
I ultimately, I'll preface this by saying I do take 2012 as a message of hope, not as a message of despair. I'm not walking around the world wearing a sandwich board saying the end of the world is nigh. But I also do take it as a wake-up call, an opportunity perhaps for us to change the direction in which we're going. I don't think you have to be, a rocket scientist to look around the world and see that things are going badly wrong. that our civilization stands poised on the edge of an abyss right now. And our governments and the huge, gigantic corporations that really run the world are so invested in spreading fear and hatred and suspicion. Fear, hatred, suspicion, again and again and again. These messages are just churned out at us, dividing us, separating us, setting us against one another. That we're in danger of making that come true. You know, we don't need some blind geological cataclysm. Humanity today is perfectly capable of reducing this whole edifice of civilization to rubble and forcing us, as Plato said about Atlantis, to begin again like children with no memory of what went before. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be the end of human civilization. We have choice. That is the fundamental thing. I believe that the people of the world need to take power back into their own hands, to take sovereignty over themselves and their own consciousness, to stop handing it over to governments and to huge corporations, and to consider very carefully the direction we go in the future. And you know, the antidote to fear and hatred and suspicion is love. If we can simply operate with love towards one another, beginning at the very direct person-to-person level and spreading that out to the level of nations, we don't need to step over the edge of that abyss into cataclysm and into chaos. And when I look around the world today and look at young people in particular, what I see is a tremendous awakening of consciousness. People are no longer prepared to put up with all that crap that has been stuffed down their throats for so long by the powers that be. People are waking up all around the world. You've seen it in the Arab Spring, we see it all over Europe, we see it in America, we see it in the Occupy Wall Street movement, we see it again and again and again. People are not prepared to put up with that bullshit any longer. I take a lot of hope from that. I believe that we are in a dangerous time, but globally there's a tremendous awakening taking place, and what's driving that awakening is love. And this is a crucial thing to remember. Now let's look at that Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar does not say that the world comes to an end on the 21st of December 2012. What it says is that a great cycle of the human story comes to an end and a new cycle begins. The Mayan calendar is cyclical. It's not a straight line. And what happens on 21st December 2012 is a cycle that has been running according to the Mayan calendar for the last 5,100 years. And that's interesting because 5,100 years is really the period of recognized history, of Orthodox history, that period is coming to an end. But if you follow the Mayan calendar true and look at what it really says, it says immediately a new cycle begins. So I think that we are in a time of great hope and great opportunity. You know, we can't separate ourselves off from the cosmos. We can't separate ourselves off from the earth. We're part of a giant system, and that system is coming to the end of a process. And it's our responsibility now, as free and independent, intelligent human beings, sovereign over our own consciousness, to make the right choices for the future. And if we make those choices, and if we drive those choices with love, not with fear and hatred and suspicion, then I think the future is going to be bright for all of us.
Absolutely, I think that's a great message and a hopeful statement to the world. Really, you know, I think that's definitely true as well. It seems that is actually happening. You know,
it is happening, and it's happening with the youth. You know, I stand here. I'm 61 years old now. I've lived my life. I've seen many things, terrible things and wonderful things, in my years on this planet. But never have I seen a time when there is such an awakening of consciousness taking place. And yes, there's dark shadows. Yes, there's terrible things happening in the world, but I place my hope in the youth and in the awakening of consciousness that's taking place now. That's what's going to carry us forward into a wonderful future.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I was going to say as well, you know, that I think the whole point of this as well is that we're really into people thinking for themselves
Yeah.
and asking questions and questioning authority, and I think that's really important.
It's so
and
important.
as you're saying, that's happening all over the world in many different ways.
Yeah.
And I think if people continue to do that, then we can only get better as
Yeah.
a human.
We have to
Human
question
race.
authority. That's what I've been doing regarding history. Authority says it was a certain way, and I've tried to say it might have been another way. We have to question authority because it's authority, the so-called authorities, that have got us into the mess that the world is in today. Those bankers, those huge corporations, those malicious, mean-spirited governments who stir up fear and hatred and suspicion just to keep themselves in power. Those are the authorities, and those are the ones who have brought the world to the edge of catastrophe. We must question everything they do and everything they say, and just refuse to accept what is spoon-fed to us as the facts. And that's what I see. That's what I see happening. I believe in the youth of this planet.
Yeah, I think the whole thing about questioning authority, like I think sometimes people take that phrase as being, oh, you should just be against everything, like fight the authority, but it's not. It's just questioning it, and
It's questioning.
If what they're doing is the right thing, then your question should be once it's answered, oh, they're right.
We should
Fair
question.
enough,
We
you know,
should
but-
question everything. One of the divisive. This is a controversial thing to say, but it's a fact. One of the very divisive factors in the world today is religion. Religion is dividing people. Now, what is religion but a system of ideas that people unquestioningly accept? We must question everything.
Yeah.
Don't just because our parents said this was so and their parents said this was so, it doesn't mean it's so. This is part of the grand story of the human species, that we are awakening to consciousness, that we are individuals. We are individual sparks of consciousness. And we should not accept to be told how we may think and how we must act in the world. We must make those choices for ourselves based on a complete evaluation of what we see, not simply on what we're told.
Yeah.
Authority is a very dangerous thing because it locks us into rigid patterns of behavior that other people have created for us rather than patterns that we create for ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the way to keep expanding and improving, isn't it? To look at what's gone before and reevaluate constantly. Take the good bits, leave the bad.
Exactly. Hope for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally, for sure.
So Graham, just want to say thank you very much for your time and all your words of wisdom, and it's been great to come here and in this epic environment to meet you. Just wanted to know if you had anything happening at the moment, if you're writing a book or if you're...
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I am. My whole life story has been a process of constant reinvention. I spent the last 20 years writing big non-fiction books about the past, about historical mysteries, and I would say that I have walked the walk as well as talking the talk. Part of my research involved 6 years of scuba diving all around the world, looking for underwater ruins, putting my life on the line. Myself and my wife Santa, who's a photographer, we worked together on these projects. But I reached a point in around about 2005, 2006, where I felt strongly that I needed to take a different direction in my writing. As I'm getting on in my years, I want to challenge myself in different ways. Again, this is slightly controversial, but part of the process of challenging myself has been to explore extraordinary experiences. And I've been down to Brazil and to the Amazon several times, and I've worked with shamans there. And have drunk the extraordinary visionary brew called ayahuasca, which means the vine of souls. They believe that a great intelligence lies behind that vine and that she works with the human creature. And when I drank ayahuasca, I was given the story of a novel. And I was pretty much told, go away and write it. So I did. I wrote a novel called Entangled, my first work of fiction. Which it's the story of the battle of good against evil. It has one young woman living in the 21st century and another young woman living in the Stone Age. And they are brought together across time by a supernatural being to do battle with a demon who travels through time. And it's their story, their battle, their confrontation with evil, and the way that that time mysteriously works in spirals rather than in straight lines. And I must say it was a liberation for me to write a work of fiction, to write a novel. I think my readers have been surprised. Not many of them have followed me in this direction, but this is my journey. I want to be constantly challenging myself. I don't want to get locked in rigid patterns. And I believe in fiction, it is possible for me to explore extraordinary ideas in a new way, without having to bog myself down in endless arguments with academics, without having to bulletproof every argument with 15 or 20 footnotes, because, hey guys, relax, it's just fantasy. But underneath the fantasy are facts and mysteries and extraordinary ideas. That's my direction for the future. In whatever years I have left on this beautiful planet, I want to continue to develop myself as a creative writer, and hopefully make some contribution to the way we think about the mysterious nature of reality.
That sounds great. It's great to be able to feel so free to change and do different things as well. To not be stuck in doing one particular thing.
I felt very strongly I don't want to get to the point where I'm just repeating myself. Just because it works. I want to constantly be challenged and never just accept things as they are. And I am lucky. I feel blessed. I feel I've had a blessed life. I've been given the opportunity to travel the world, to explore incredible ancient sites, to dive on lost cities underwater, to climb the Great Pyramid 5 times. I've been given incredible chances and incredible opportunities, and I feel so fortunate to have had that chance, and so fortunate to live on this amazing and mysterious planet.
Absolutely.
Thank you for interesting questions. What are you guys up to now? What are you doing? What's your mission and what's your story?
Yeah, right. Well, we're, for anyone that doesn't know about us, we're a rock band. We kind of mix a lot of different influences, and our whole thing is to kind of try and do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I suppose it kind of brings us back to what we were saying. Like, we sort of like, we look at what's been, and we're not stuck into, we're a punk band or we're this band. We just make music and just take from whatever we want and just make something that. And so, we've people don't really know what we are or what we're really doing a lot of the time, but we just do our thing. So it's a similar sort of thing, in a musical sense.
And I guess being musicians, it's also you're taking personal risks. I mean, you have to take a step into the dark. You can pursue a very safe course in life, and everything is predictable, or you can take risks. I guess you've taken some risks.
I suppose so, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Try not to think about the risks, really. Just get on with it.
Yeah, get on with it.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
But that's it, isn't it?
Yeah,
You just get on with it.
yeah.
You just fundamentally follow your heart and get on with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in, if you put out positive energy and positive vibes, then that's what you get back,
Yeah.
And that's what I guess we've all been about, just making the best music that we can, and the things that are true to us, music that's true to us. We weren't making it for anyone else, really. If other people like it, which some people do, that's great. That's brilliant.
Our album just came out, and luckily it was well received, but we were almost like we didn't really care, did we? We just sort of went away and made this thing.
Yeah.
And just made whatever we wanted to make, and we were like, well, if everyone hates it, well, we made what we wanted, so that's fine,
That's the way to do it. What's the album called?
Just called Turbowolf, it's just the self-title.
Fantastic.
But luckily it's gone down very well, so it's all right.
Yeah, and we've just released a single off the album. It's the third single off the album, and it's called Let's Die. It's a cheery number. it's about basically what we were talking about, is this sort of fact that it's not necessarily about the end of the world, but maybe the end of cycle or our civilization as we know it. So
It's sort of the perils of the direction that things seem to be heading in at the moment.
Yeah, as
That's
well
an
as
important message to send.
yeah, as well as a sort of story of hope. It's like that things can change if you want them to.
Yeah.
And it's completely accidental that we're releasing it in 2012. We wrote it several years ago, and we didn't even think about it.
But it's where your story has brought you to now.
So yeah, it's strange how things work out.
Yeah. So
Follow that path.
Absolutely, and you too. Yeah.
Thank you. Great to meet you guys.
Thanks a lot.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good luck. Good luck
Cheers,
with
man.
everything you're doing.
And you too.
You too.
Thanks. Cheers. Good luck.